Okay.
So,
Oh.
welcome. And we are breathing a deep breath of sort of getting grounded here tonight in the US. For many of you, many of you are in the United States or have been following the fact that this is the day of the presidential elections. And it's the day after, actually, and the results are not in yet. So there's been a little bit of anxiety in the air. Is that a good word for it? That's a very gentle word for what's been in the air.
Yeah. People are shocked. People are a little bit scared because so much of the country came out and they are participating in the far right agenda, which is like, wow. And it's frightening.
Yeah.
And because the far right, is all of these archaic institutions of racism, of caste, slavery, and definitely not democracy, definitely abuse.
Yeah.
Abuse of not only other people, but abuse of the environment. And
yeah. So an incredibly divisive feeling. And, we started doing these studio talks with this evening in mind. And I think we mentioned the first evening we did one of these talks. We did so because when the 2016 election happened, we were fortunate enough to participate the next day, the equivalent of today, in a huge gathering of people who were studying Buddhism, some who were doing yoga, and most of them actually studying neuroscience. And neuroscience under the canopy of contemplative practices. And for us at the time, and we hope that this is what this evening may contribute a little bit in a similar way for you, for us at the time, recognizing that we weren't alone, that there is an incredible, sort of wealth of people in the world who are on a path and a path toward communication, towards nonviolence, a path towards acceptance, listening, open-heartedness.
Respect for each other.
Truthfulness, which have been chipped away at over the last 4 years in particular, but over generations as well, in our country as well as many, many others. And so our hope is that tonight, by sharing some time together, we can sort of settle a little bit with this feeling of there are others out there with like-minded aims in the world who are open to listening. And the other thing that was really helpful for us in that meeting with the neuroscientists was to examine the question, why are we even doing these practices? That is something that until you get into a situation that is sort of a crisis situation or a difficult situation, sometimes the practices become selfish or
indulgent.
Yeah, indulgent or
escapist.
Yeah, speaking for ourselves. Yeah. And so realizing that the real reason we're doing these practices, and many of you have worked with us in asana, and we talk about this with asana, that when you have an injury in asana, whether it's from the asana or from a skiing injury or a car accident, when you get that physical injury, then being able to practice and use the internal alignment, internal forms, and the breath can turn the situation around because you learn to practice from the internal perspective rather than the external perspective. So you realize, that's why I've been doing these practices all these years. And so that's the point in history this evening, where we all are, on the brink of potential change, but also on the brink of potential suffering. And so we are really wanting to look at how can these practices help, and how can each of us really take the practices and put them out into the world in a way that serves other beings, not only human beings. So Richard had an interesting thought during his practice today about the prana.
I just have one idea that came to mind. When they say internal forms, that's actually a classical term called antara lakshya, which just means internal markings or patterns. And it could be like just a simple geometry, or it could be the complex visualization of a deity in ultra high definition, whatever. But when you do that, it's done within the context of having done what's called a Shambhavi mudra, in which with your eyes you simply gaze, an empty gaze, and you go and you feel this great opening through the heart. And then when you drop the breath, then when you work with the internal forms, you're now working, trying to make your body fit them, or you're trying to make them happen. But they come and they go, and there's absolutely no attachment to them. So there's no ego involved in them. And so, but if you work with just form, I'm going to make my body feel good, or I'm going to make my body taller, or I'm going to make it shorter. There was a great yoga teacher named Procrustes who was very famous back in the day. And he had methods to do that. And so the whole idea in the nicer yoga, real hatha yoga or the tantra yoga, is that you're nice. And so, and then you get this access to what's called swara, which is flow. And I was thinking of swara in relation to the fact that unfortunately, we have a two-party system in the United States currently, although because of the Electoral College, the winner takes all. It's like if you have, maybe half the voters want something and just a tiny bit under. So anyone, if they lose just by a little bit, there's no representation for them. And so this winner take all method creates a lot of lack of representation for people who don't actually win or manipulate the elections. That's too bad. So, but the fact that there are two reminded me of swara. And so sometimes the right nostril, that's the entrance into the sun channel called the Ida. There are a number of names. And the Ida corresponds to the left hemisphere of the brain. And the quality of it is the sun. And so it's represented in different colors. And in some systems, it's represented as red. Okay? And you can make of that what you like. But it's very, when your left hemisphere is stimulated, it's very linear. Everything is like, we know what we want. We know and that's what's important. And you don't see other points of view. And you've simply bought this reduction of everything to a kind of simplistic, linear formula. And you take everything literally. You're not into poetry or metaphor or subtlety. And then it's opposite The opposite side is the moon channel, the Ida, and the Ida has a corresponding function with the right hemisphere of the brain, which is, it's like the nighttime. So when the moon channel is active, it's like at night. And at night, sometimes if you go out of the clouds, you'll see that there are thousands of stars in the sky. And then if you really look a little close, it's not thousands of stars, it's billions of stars. And if you look even closer, it's billions of galaxies. And it's like, you're looking at infinity on all these different scales. And so the moon channel allows one to see the non-dual infinity of things. But sometimes if it's not balanced with the immediate and practical world, your everyday world, of survival world of the sun channel, one becomes overwhelmed and they become almost depressed. And they just see, well, it's all infinity, and there's like a, it's as good as, because it's all impermanent, and so what's the good of it? And it's no fun, and so the extreme in the sun channel or the moon channel is based on an egotistical interpretation, and it's suffering either way.
And over the course of any given day, the dominance in the swara changes, like every hour and a half or something like that, naturally. And you can feel it. You can, we've talked in other talks recently about this wave pattern of change that is the gunas acting on the gunas. And in a way, the embodied representation of that is this gradual shift from moon to sun channel and then back to the moon channel, etc., that goes on
all the time.
All the time. And if you start paying attention to it, you can conceivably start noticing different mind states associated with the different, the two different sides. And of course, as Richard's saying, we don't want to get stuck in one side or the other, but instead,
we want the middle path.
We want the middle.
And that's I think that's what yoga has to offer, not only politically, philosophically, but in terms of everything we do. One has to see that both channels communicate with each other, or they don't actually, they don't have to communicate. They have to simultaneously wake up, and then one starts to appreciate that which is infinite and awesome, the non-dual perspective. But then you start to see the importance, but the relativity of the limited contextual knowledge. The everyday decision that this is important, that's not important, all context dependent. But if you have the moon channel open at the same time, you'll see it's dependent on context. And so what happens is, if you can get both channels to balance, and this is what we work on, and this has everything to do with how you're experiencing your body, the fields of sensation around you. And if you practice and you feel just I don't want to say the miracle of the body, well, I'll say it, the miracle of just what is arising, whether it's a body or not, that could be a theory about it. But the immediate presentation of sensation before you hallucinate or theorize that they're separate objects in the fields of sensation, what happens is that both channels become balanced and the palate releases and you go, and there's this sense of completely awake, stunning, with this kind of natural sense of happiness, in which there's no longer a seeking uh, for happiness or a trying to get rid of sadness. So there's no longer clinging and there's no longer uh, hatred. Um, and so this is considered to be the middle path. And it's the opening of the central channel, which gives you this sense of this satisfaction, even though with the mind, because the mind is almost like in this state of awe, it can make theories about, but it doesn't even need to be the highest state or the lowest state. And you'll think, oh, I'm enlightened. And then if a thought like that arises, you just notice the thought. And it's like, because any thought you have corresponds to a sensation pattern in the system. And so it's quite an interesting practice, the middle path practice, because it allows you to feel that which is totally satisfying. And what is totally satisfying is, of course, all beings, just their intrinsic nature, and they're right there. So it's not actually, and it's the true you of you, and that is also the true them of them, and it's just like sweet, and it doesn't have to be super powerful, and it doesn't have to be big. It's completely liberated or unhooked from all qualification. It's just, what do they call that? Octave. Or,
yeah. And it's not something that requires technique. In fact, if you discover a technique, which you might through doing pranayama practices or asana practices, or as Richard was saying, just gazing practice, where you are really focusing on the sensation patterns of drishti, where the eyes are looking with great inquisitiveness, but without a sense of grasping or rejecting or naming or theorizing. Any of those practices, many, many others, can bring you into this natural state. And they do have techniques involved in them. But the trick is, as we practice, and this is a trick that we'll build on in terms of, well, what do we do about tonight being the night of uncertainty? But the trick is to be able to trust the process and trust this sense of perception that you have access to within your own physical embodied experience, and the sensation of balance, so that, as Richard describes this sort of luminous state of freedom and joy that can come if you get the Ida and the Pingala balanced, etc. Just a taste of it, where even you imagine it. Maybe you can't actually feel it, but you can say, well, Richard has felt it. Maybe I can just imagine it. Or other people have felt it. Maybe I can imagine it. Then that's on the right path. When you get an image of what it should be.
Right, then you think you need it, and you'll never, and it's right in front of your face. And so one of the paradoxical qualifications is that experience makes you feel like you don't need that as an experience. In other words, it's just the nature of things already is satisfying. And so, but you kind of know that you feel great, and you think, oh, I don't, it's not a conceptual thing. And even though it's not conceptual, probably you'll make concepts anyway. Particularly if you try to talk about it, you'll get entangled instantly. And then technique, you'll think, oh, I want it to look like this. And you'll notice that you're creating technique. And when that occurs, you smile. In other words, you go back and you see the paradox of the Ida and the Pingala and the Ida talking to each other about, oh, this is literally true, no, that's metaphor. It's a story, no, it's actually reality. And if they interweave, the intelligence is always there. And so it's just like having an ego. The teaching of yoga is the function of ego is a sacred thing. Fortunately, it's not you. And so if you see your mind being a normal mind and getting mad or angry at a situation, at first you think, if you're a very kind of moral or religious person, it's so bad of me to be angry, particularly certain situations or certain groups of people. And then you'll say, oh, but it's very bad, And so then you get angry at yourself for being angry. Okay, and then we fall into the classical loop, which people do, where they get angry that they're angry. And then they get angry that they're angry that they're angry because at a certain point,
or any other,
or being happy, you get attached to happiness just as much as you get, trapped by anger or greed or whatever. At a certain point, you see, oh, that is the phenomenon that is actually arising. And then that means that both the sun and the moon channels are simultaneously awake and they're almost dancing or communicating with each other. So there's this continuous flashing into haha. And so you see the ego is divine. Just be careful because it's not actually you. It's a function of mind, just like thinking. And that's quite profound and quite challenging to do.
So the metaphor of the breath, the left and the right, the left wing, the right wing, is very relevant to the situation we're currently in. And if we look at today's world, and we look at it almost as if it is a pranayama practice gone wrong, what we start to kind of recognize is that this ability for the two sides of things or multiplicity of things to really have their own integrity and yet at the same time capture the ability to trust themselves enough, be truthful enough with themselves that they can trust, and then look at the other side and interface with that other side, potentially even having an effect that is one of change to one's own perspective or one's own view. And what's happened in the world, which is, just heart-wrenching to watch these days, is the divisiveness. And it's not only in our country, but it's in many parts of the world where there's this incredible divisiveness that is being sort of generated and regenerated and fed, and that people are hanging on so tight to their Ida or their Pingala, their point of view, that there is no possibility of dropping into what in a metaphorical way would be the sushumna or the middle path in the way we behave in the world. Mm-hmm. And so we can take our practices and use them not only as these physical forms of interfacing with the world, but as metaphorical forms that we can then build on to understand, oh, this is a pattern. What is going on in the world at the moment is a pattern that we're all familiar with within our own nervous systems, within our own physical
and we have different ways of talking about it. But that's cool. If you communicate with somebody, then you start to understand how they're talking about it. And, eventually at some point there'll be, aha, now I understand your point of view.
Or
I don't understand your point of view, but because I've been communicating, I like you anyway. And at least that's better than killing each other.
Yeah.
And so there's this funny mispronunciation of pranayama, and they say pranayama. So prana or pran is prana, and yama means to kill or to hold down, to control. And the actual word is pranayama. So yama is the word for death, and it can be in a good sense, the yamas, these are like, I vow to be nonviolent, ahimsa, and I vow to be truthful, and all over the place. And those are very powerful and important things. But pranayama means to free the prana, which are the sensation patterns that compose the historical embodiment, which is your current body, to unfold, let the prana unfold out of it into its incredible radiance, or its natural state. And that's the yoga. So the pranayama is this way of going from the thought patterns we have back into the kind of the root of those thought patterns, which is the sensation patterns that compose the embodiment that we currently have. And so it's like we're going back all the time into history. So histos meaning flesh in Greek. And so the body is just, and literally, biologically, this is history. It's, as humans, we like to think, oh, wow, I'm at the top of the chain, but I'm sure other species have some different opinions about the humans. They're not doing a very good job with the rest of the environment. But that's it's what's there, and the teaching is, if the Sushumna channel is open, this middle path, you don't see intellectually, but you just know you're not that the body is impermanent, that the mind is impermanent. You're not the body, you're not the mind. And so then,
and you have
they are sacred.
Yeah.
And so, in the continuous arising of situations, the mind is, whether you admit it or not, the mind is going to come up with plans and things that it needs to work on. And this is good. So so the yoga is actually allowing that action to take place, but skillfully. And the skill comes from study, practice, communication, compassion, relating to others. And then you can actually do things.
And you, in that process, you start to use discriminating awareness to be able to assess the situation, starting at first with your own embodied experience, assessing, using discriminating awareness to see what is, more real or less real. And that's where you start. Discriminating awareness is sort of like a spectrum of an ability to be able to interface with.
And hopefully you got a little bit of it going.
Yeah.
Because you need it just to walk down the street successfully, to know if that's actually solid, or is that like open water, or is that the sky, or is that an elephant, or is that a bus, or is that there's so many, and that initial ability to label things, to recognize things in context is very important. But discriminating awareness is actually much more interesting function as it develops.
Mm-hmm.
And it's what is cultivated through different practices in yoga. It's represented by the double-edged sword. The great Bodhisattva Manjushri, and he has a sword, and Patanjali they switched the sword. He's got a sword, and it's double-edged, and it's extremely sharp. And this is the function in your intelligence, which is considered the most precious or the most important function, because what it does is it slices apart any confusion between the arising of the immediate experience and then the category that the mind reduces it to. Or they call it nama and rupa. So rupa is what is arising, which in terms of our embodiment is our shared experience of the earth. And by earth we mean, that you have to, what do we really mean by earth? But then we name it, and the naming is like a little category or tag that then opens up the file where you get all this information about earth and all this. And then you ignore the rupa and you go off on the storyline of the nama or the nima. And we do that with everything around us.
And it's in that process where, we need to have discriminating awareness. We need to be able to, it's an incredibly valuable function that we have. And at the same time, when we go off on the storylines, then we are prone to become attached to our ideas or to what we think we need or what we think, we don't need, becoming disgusted by those things. And we've talked about the roots of suffering, and the true roots of suffering are this, ignorance that separates us out from everything else, and then that creates the ego, and then from there that causes this sense of grasping or pushing away. And
non-discriminating
awareness, yeah. And so we named the talk this evening, I forget the exact name, but it's something like the unyoking I think it was the unyoking that is yoga. And we thought that was really relevant to this time in history and to this particular idea we're talking about too, in that when we think of yoga at first, and we open a dictionary or look on Wikipedia or whatever, we're very likely to come across the meaning of yoga as yoking or joining, linking. I'm laughing about it because when I first was typing to type in the title, being a cook, I typed it in UNYOLKING, like a yolk, an egg yolk. And then I'm like, wait a minute, something's wrong here. So it's not that kind of yolk. It's the yolk like a plow animal wears. Yoke your buffalo. And that is what yoga is often described as. And yet that becomes the root of suffering when the yoke becomes a sort of stuck process. And when we therefore start grasping or pushing away, and it becomes the root of suffering. And so in the Gita, and I had it written down somewhere and probably put it in the other room, but somewhere in the 6th chapter, I think somewhere around the 18th verse or 20th verse or something like that. This is where there is this verse that talks about, because the 6 chapters of the Gita is what talks about what is yoga. And that's one of the definitions of yoga, that it is the unyoking. And yet in order to unyoke, you have to be yoked first.
Anyway, in Bengali, yoga is pronounced joka.
Yeah, I was going to say, and that's no yoke.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what we're linking with, so yoga means you link up with the beloved and you link up with other beings, and you cease the linking up with that which has nothing to link with, which is all manifestation, time and space. And so that's why the definition gets to flip. And it's a very interesting thing where if you can, with discriminating awareness, whenever there's an arising, and if you notice the mind overlaying with a story, and even it could be a great story or an intelligent story, and you have to do that, the mind is going to do that anyway. Otherwise, that's what its job is. But if you have that double-edged sword, you're able to see through the fact that the storyline, the nama, is just contingent on context. It doesn't really it isn't really the same as the amazing thing that you're trying to reduce to. Like if you see, a beautiful butterfly, you go, oh, and it's very helpful. You recognize what the butterflies are generally pretty nice, and so maybe you have a new friend or something. But occasionally, you just got to look at the butterfly and let your breath stop as the swara disappears in both the sun and the moon channel. And then you experience oneness with the butterfly. I'm sure the butterfly is in other words, even then any description of it is wrong because there's not one. It's like description is not necessary. And so the discriminating awareness, it allows you to still have good theories and good works, because you're going to be doing work and action anyway, but without the ego getting involved. And so with discriminating awareness, you see that, there's actually no subject there that I'm looking at. There's actually nothing there. But the sword is double-edged. And so in playing with it, the subject is sliced away from the object. And so there's no subject also. And that's very nice.
And so this is relevant to what's going on in the world, in that, what really starts happening within your own body, this sort of containment, and then the stuckness of my view or my ego's view versus, the sort of broader true view of the bigger self, of the Atman or something, is that happens in the world all the time. And that's what we are experiencing in this world. And that's where, divisiveness and splitness and problems that seem that they are impossible to solve. That's where they come from, is this sort of macro version of your own physical embodied experience of the prana and the apana becoming constricted by thought, or your asana becoming constricted by thought, or your philosophical theories becoming constricted. And this morning I was thinking, as I was doing my practice, I was really thinking about this idea of unlinking. And what came up for me was this sensation pattern within the body, that when the breath when you are really integrating the breath in the way that Richard first described when we first sat down here, and you are, you're extraordinarily attentive to it and noticing, the Ida and the Pingala and the shifting and the sensation patterns of the waves of the breath and the, expansiveness of it all, When you are feeling that, the mind just becomes absorbed by that. And even just for a second. And in that space, when the mind and the breath join together, it really is this visceral feeling of sort of natural intelligence that isn't a thought, that isn't an idea. It's just this sense of natural intelligence, meaning a physical experience of interconnectedness, which is really what intelligence is seeing how things fit together. And if you pay attention closely and you notice that feeling inside, and if you ever even get that, there is this feeling of, almost like the flame of awareness, which is also something described in the Gita, of this idea of, when you're really doing yoga and focusing the mind, it is as if it is the candle or the flame in a place without wind that is not being disturbed.
Right, and so it's brilliantly focused. And to focus the mind that way, which is practice, you almost have to allow the natural tendency of the mind to have, to be religious, in the sense that it says, this is the most important thing. This is the sacred space, whether it's, something on your windowsill or something on a table somewhere, or a holy mountain, or, the tip of your nose or something. And it's almost like a game that the mind always does. Oh, this is the important thing, or this, and it worships it religiously. And then when you go into it, you see through it. You see, yes, it does contain the entire universe, this holy flame, but actually it's not a flame, because you see it's nothing in there. And so the flame of consciousness is a metaphor. But you could visualize a flame, a literal flame, a candle flame. But then if you really pay attention, it goes, and that's what a relief. Otherwise, in our communication, we think, I've had this experience of the holy flame. Okay, even if it's the one under the pot of my belly, it's a flame of pure consciousness. And what I'm trying to do is then to convert the whole world to the flame of pure consciousness under the belly religion. And if you want to be happy, all you have to do is join my cult. And that, even though I had beautiful metaphors and things, and great scriptures and tons of tradition, the whole history, that misunderstanding, that confusion, where the sword of intelligence hasn't been applied, can reduce it to a really hellish situation.
And so you feel it inside when you are feeling this sense of whatever it is, of awe, of interconnectedness. There is, if you really start meditating, and it's not like some fancy meditation, you just pay attention to what you're feeling like. It is that feeling we talk about of spaciousness that is not identified with the story of you, but that resides in the depth of your physical being. And when that feeling of spaciousness disappears or starts to get starts to shrink, then that is a cue that you have stopped being as connected to the balance of the of opposites and the interfacing with others. And what happens if you do that, if you cut yourself off from others, if you grasp onto things which cuts yourself off from others repeatedly, is that you have this concept of, whatever it is you've decided is the sacred thing or sacred idea. And it's almost as if it lives in this, hollow of your head without being a flame, but almost it's like this constricted, yeah.
Yeah.
And you can physically feel like, well, if I'm really just feeling constricted and constrained, and maybe like my head is hollow, but I'm, and I'm not feeling this sense of breath just coming and going in all directions without me having to do anything, then that's a point within our everyday experience that we all go through all the time. Because when you're relaxed and not thinking about things, this feeling of spaciousness is a natural state, because it's a feeling of connectedness, a feeling of non-ego. And so,
but I had that feeling like about today, at least 1,000 times.
Yeah, but we can't hold on to it today. It's hard to hold on to today.
No, I'm not the spacious feeling. The feeling of...
the feeling of constriction.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Wanting to...
Watching anger arise and being angry at yourself for being angry.
Oh, then an infinite chain of demonic anger. And if I try to get rid of it, and the whole practice is to see, not to hold on to that, because then I can start to cultivate some, what's the word, compassion for the demonic being, which is my own deeper unconscious, because I, due to the ego, I think, I'm a holy being. And so, and actually my deep mind is laughing at that joke, and it's because all of the demons have been repressed. But then if the whole practice of central channel is you start to see, the mind is actually this incredibly amazing brilliance with plenty of hellish little pits.
Yeah, garnishes.
And but it's not me.
Yeah.
You can watch it, and it's just if you look at it closely, there's nobody there. And same thing with certain politicians. If I can experience in myself that which I consider to be, really bad, potential, then I can see, and there's a potential then of communication with them. It might be not this lifetime, or, but at least there's the potential of not casting them out of my heart and becoming obsessed, becoming as bad as they are, because I'm obsessed with doing away with them. But you can become obsessed with helping such beings.
Yeah.
And there's might even be some delight in being of service.
Yeah. And so the practice that we're thinking of tonight, that is hopefully helpful for you, for us, for others, is to explore in whatever way you can explore the visceral feeling of balance within you, of spaciousness, where you are tapping into tenderness within the core of your own heart that is always there, but that becomes it becomes obscured by fear, by attachment, by anger, by neglect.
By ignoring.
Yeah. By ignoring it. And that if we take the time to really remember experiences when we have felt the sense of great relief that one feels when you see someone you love dearly, and you look into their eyes and you see past the craziness, the demonic and all of that, and you feel what that feels like, or you look, as we often say, into the eyes of a kitten, or some really wonderful older animals, like wonderful dogs that you might have, or a cat that you might know. And you look deeply at them and you feel no sense of separation in a way. And that is the kind of feeling that we need to start cultivating in this world, no matter what happens politically, no matter what happens environmentally, no matter what happens on any of the planes that are deeply threatened by the way the world is right now. That as individuals, we can do these tiny steps, which are the steps of finding that spaciousness within ourselves. And from that point, you then have the ability to have some sense of clear thinking. And at that stage, therefore, you can discern the best action that you think can be taken. You can use discriminating awareness at that point. If you say, well, they said do discriminating awareness, and I'm really uptight about stuff right now, and I'm going to discriminate and become aware, it just goes off into some awful realm. So all of these things have to start from the place of as much balance as you can muster, which some days is less than others. But being able to be surrounded by friends and community and teachers and sort of memories of being able to hold on to a sense of letting go. So holding on, yoking, so that you can unyoke. That's where the real depth of yoga that will get us through difficult times like this start to bubble up to the surface.
And so you do what you got to do, because you're going to be doing something. And then you open your ears, and people might give you some feedback. And that's the way that, together we can start to, create, a happier place. Because you've got to act. You have to act, and from your action, you can actually get more knowledge. If you open your ears and just listen. So I think there's a lot to do.
There's a lot to do.
Yeah. So if you need something to do, just open your ears, open your eyes, and let's get at it.
Yeah. So we wish we could say, here's a quick and easy thing.
Here's the answer.
Here's the answer. But we also wish that we're happy that we can't, because that makes us remember there really isn't one answer to navigating in this world, other than showing up. And rather than when we get, like I've noticed myself today thinking, oh, this side, that the people who are violent and who are separate, doing all kinds of violence and illegal things and non-truthful things, that's horrible. And then rather than seeing that in myself and seeing that part of what makes me angry about that is that I could very easily be in that camp, because I have seeds for all of those things, as we all do within ourselves. And so I'm not really angry, I'm afraid. I'm afraid that that's going to make me water those seeds of intolerance and horrible actions and that cause suffering. And I'm not consciously aware of that at all, and I don't think that I would, because I think I'd catch myself. But there is this deep, deep, deep sort of root that is rooted in fear. And so if we can learn to trust ourselves, and then we recognize that we are doing the best we can, we present ourselves in the world in a way where we're open. And that is what's called trustworthiness. And if we are trustworthy, then that causes others to sort of water the seeds of trust within themselves as well. And so it becomes this spiral that starts to happen in a good way. But continually we have to come back and look at ourselves again and be brutally honest with, you know, the patterns each of us are stuck with. You know, it's who we are. And just say, as Richard says, you know, just when you see whatever it is arising, smile at it rather than become distressed by it. And then eventually maybe it won't happen as often. And that's what we can offer as hope into this new time that we are moving into, whatever way this election in the United States turns out, whatever way the atrocities in the world that are happening today turn out. If we can really show up together. And the yoga practices, when they're not done in a self-serving manner, that's really what they give us, is this ability to see that the world is a reflection of this chaos in each one of us too. And so let's take good care of it and see how we can make it make some healing happen.
So we got some work to do.
We got some work to do. So
if you're unemployed,
there are no excuses now.
So we should see if anybody.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Do we want to see if there are any questions? So if anyone has a question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. And if not, we can do a chant.
We'll give them 30 more seconds.
Okay.
What chant should we do? Swasti or Sahanava?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, wait, there's a question.
Oh, there's a question.
Hey, let's get it. No, it was just a thank you. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Thank you all. And what we will do is we will continue these talks. At the moment, we'll probably do one. Check the website, check the Facebook. We'll do them when we do them, but we're planning probably to do them for the Wednesdays at this time for a while. So we are so grateful that you would tune in. And please feel free to email or be in touch if you have questions about things that you would like us to talk about.
So there's a Shanti Pat chant, which is essentially non-sectarian, which it's hard to find a chant that isn't sectarian. Sahana Bhavatu, so may we be protected together. Sahana Bonaktu, may we enjoy, together. Sahaviryam Karavavahe, may we with great courage do the work that is arising, that needs to be done. Tejasvi Navadi Tamastu. And may our study together, so we study things together, may it be filled with brilliance and Mavit Vishalahe, and may we not hit each other as a result of that process. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. So it's Om Sahana Bhavatu
Sahana Vavatu
Sahana Bhunaktu
Sahana Bonaktu
Sahaviryam karavavahai.
Saha Viryam Karavavahai.
Tejasvi navaditam astu.
Tejasvi Navaditamastu.
Ma vidvishavahai.
Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
Thank you very much. We look forward to seeing more of you.
Okay. Please be safe. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.